out, I've redrawn my entire drawing. So now I'm just going to take a kneaded eraser and very gently lift up and just keep the lightest line that I can on this drawing. Just very gently lift off the transfer line so that all that's left is this nice fine line drawing that you've created. All right, so this painting now, or this drawing, is ready to paint. Everything is in place. It's nice and neat. One of the important things that you want to do is protect this watercolor paper while you're painting, because it's very easy to have it get messed up, either by dropping a brush or a blot of water or the cat walking on it, who knows. Anyway, what you want to do is create a tissue paper window so that only the part of the drawing that, or the painting that you're working on, is exposed, and the rest of the paper around it is protected and kept pristine. So the way you do this is take a piece of tracing paper that's about the same size as the watercolor paper that you're working with, and draw. I usually like to have a flap on one side, so I draw around the subject with just a little bit of space. So that I'm not up against the drawing itself. What we're going to do is we're going to cut this away, but I want one area where it's not going to be cut, so that I can fold this back and forth like a window. Please do not cut on your watercolor paper. Take another sheet of scrap board, something where you can see the line that you have, and take your X-Acto knife then and cut through. And this doesn't have to be super perfect, but cut through your tracing paper to create a window that opens and closes. And that's what this is going to do. So once you've got your window, replace it onto your watercolor paper and tape it in place. Now, if you feel real confident and you don't think you're going to need your tracing any longer, you can take this off. I like to keep it on if I have details in this, if I have details inside the main structure of the drawing that I don't like to transfer immediately onto the paper. Sometimes I want to paint the structure and then I'll put some of the details in after the fact. But in this case, this is probably not going to be the case. So now you have your window protecting your paper, so you're ready to go. So now you can paint, except for the fact that you don't know what your colors are. So the next thing you need to do is do a color test on another piece of watercolor paper, and I'm going to take my color wheel and now figure out where I need to be. So this is really a very blue-green in the dark sections of the leaves, and probably more of a yellowy green in the lighter sections of the leaves. So I'm going to start by trying to mix some color. And the thing is that you must mix a lot of color. That is key. So I'm going to take a whole tray and mix up my colors. I'm going to take a whole tray and mix up my colors. All right, at this point I've mixed up several shades of green, as you can see in my mixing tray. And these are actually quite thick in terms of the concentration. And as I said, you can thin these out as you need them just by the addition of water. You can even use your eyedropper and thin things out to get the concentration that you need. But at least if you have these strong concentrations, you're pretty much guaranteed you're going to have enough paint to paint this artichoke. Again, it's much more difficult to try and remix these colors, especially, you know, in these early stages where you're just starting to paint. The other thing that I want you to see here is that I have a plate, and I think what you should do is create some skins at this point prior to your starting to paint, so that you'll have them when you're ready to dry brush. So it's just a matter of taking your color and putting a few swatches down. Hopefully it'll be enough, and I'm sure that probably will be, because this is going to be at the very end when you're dry brushing your fine details. And just take and combine things a little bit so that you have a variety of range of greens on your plate. This one's quite dark. And, you know, it's some places you want to mix it, and some places you want it to be pure color. And then I'm going to take a little of this shadow color that I created and mix that also with the green, so that you have something to work from. You know, who knows, you may need some yellow. So this you'll just let dry, and you save this until the end when you're ready to do your dry brush work. Most of these colors are just basically sap green with a little lemon yellow or a little cadmium, depending on what you see. And in this case, I used a little permanent rose to create the shadow. So we can just take some of these. So here's a color. Add a little water so you can see what the thinness is. And you should do this with your color as well, so that you can see what you're going to get from which mix that you've made. Shadow. Now I might want to add a little bit more blue to this. It looks a little bit brown compared to the darks that I have here, or it just might be a matter of just adding a bit more green to it to get it closer to where I want it to be. So now you have your colors. You know what you've got. And make a record. Don't just leave this to chance, all right? So I've used sap green, and I've used ultramarine blue, and I've used Windsor lemon or lemon yellow, and I've used permanent rose. So now we're ready to paint. But I think you need to think about this structure first of all. It's dual. First of all, this is basically a sphere, right? Okay, so you should have your specimen set up in front of you. And what I recommend is do a little quick sketch here, you know, just to show the overall shape. Because basically this is kind of a sphere with a little bit of a flattened cone on the top. And then you would probably have your stem on here also, which is what I've added to mine. But if you think about this, overall, this is where your highlight is. So this part of your artichoke, even though you've got all these bracts, this is going to be your lightest area in here. And then it's going to shade to dark with maybe even a core shadow in there. just to give yourself some sort of a reference as to where you're going to put your shadows, I would do a basic overall shadow first, and then you can start to put in the shadows for each of the barrettes. But the first thing you're going to need to do is a tea wash, so that you have that underlying warm yellow color on the underside of all of your painting. It kind of, first of all, it gives what the tea wash does. It kind of gives definition to the overall form so you can see what you're painting. And second, it kind of brightens everything up. And you'll notice that on your specimen, you have very specific areas where there are light areas and dark areas. So based on where your highlights and shadows fall, that's what you're going to be using as a reference to paint. So the first thing we need is this tea wash. I would do this with a touch of Windsor lemon, maybe add just a little cadmium yellow into it, and make sure you have enough, and test. You must test everything to see how light or dark you are before you start to paint. Now this tea wash can be quite light. You just want it as an underlying reference for your painting. It's really important when you're working with large areas like this that you dampen the page. So what we're going to do is we're going to take some clean water and we're going to go over our entire painting. And we're still going to use the puddle technique in order to do the flat wash for the tea wash. And the moisture will start to go into the fibers of the paper and keep them slightly damp. So we've got this dampened nicely. All right, so we're going to mix up a good amount of yellow here so that you don't run out and so that you can create a nice big puddle as you're working. And you can see I'm adding quite a bit of water to this. So we have plenty of wash, and we test. That looks pretty good. Now don't forget, this will dry a little lighter. So I'm going to take this now, and I'm going to put a puddle down, or I'm going to start, and keep that puddle moving. As soon as you're starting to run out, you're going to have to go back to your reservoir and get, like here, add a little more to get it to keep it from blotching up on you. Stay in the lines. It's like coloring book, remember? Make sure you've gotten all your edges. As long as it's wet, you can go back into it. Just don't change the dilution of the paint. Now, down here, I want this to fade out. So I'm going to clean my brush, and I'm going to start to just fade that out, because I don't have a lot of information on this stem, so I don't want to give it too much importance. So I'm just going to let this just fade to the white of the paper. So now we have to wait for this to dry. And once we do that, then we'll go back in and we will put in our local shadows so that you start to see the structure of this artichoke.